On the evening of August 15, 1971, the world of money changed forever. Though most people watching their television screens that Sunday night didn't yet realize the gravity of what was happening, President Richard Nixon sat behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office to deliver an address titled "The Challenge of Peace," a speech that would become known to history and every corner of global finance as the Nixon Shock. For 25 years, the global economy had operated under the Bretton Woods system, a post-World War II agreement that established the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency, uniquely backed by gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Under this system, the dollar was as good as gold, and every other major currency was pegged to the dollar, creating a world of predictable exchange rates and relative stability. But by the late 1960s, this golden era was cracking. The United States was struggling under the massive financial weight of the Vietnam War and the social programs of the Great Society, printing more dollars than it had gold to back them up. Inflation was creeping towards 6%, unemployment was rising, and for the first time in the 20th century, the American trade balance had turned into a deficit. Foreign nations, led by a skeptical France and a rising West Germany, began to lose faith in the dollar's golden promise. They saw the mountain of paper dollars circulating globally and realized the math simply didn't add up anymore, in a move that signaled the beginning of the end. French President Georges Pompidou even went so far as to send a naval ship to New York Harbor to retrieve French gold deposits from the Federal Reserve, literally demanding the physical metal in exchange for the paper. This was a classic bank run on a global scale, a high-stakes game of chicken between the world's superpowers. If every country demanded their gold at once, the United States would be bankrupt, its vaults empty, and its prestige destroyed. The game was up. Faced with the choice of crashing the American economy to save the gold standard or killing the gold standard to save the economy, Nixon chose the latter. He convened a secret meeting at the Camp David presidential retreat, gathering 15 of his top economic advisors in total isolation. Among them were Treasury Secretary John Connally, a towering and aggressive Texan, and a young, brilliant Paul Volcker. They worked through the weekend in a state of high tension, knowing that what they were planning would effectively overthrow the entire global order. They hid the plan from the State Department and America, as closest foreign allies, to prevent a market panic or a diplomatic revolt. When Nixon finally went on air that Sunday, he announced a three-part emergency plan: a 90-day freeze on wages and prices, a 10% surcharge on all imports to protect American industry, and most importantly, the temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold. He looked into the camera and promised that this move was designed to stop the speculators and protect the American worker. He called it temporary, but the gold window never opened again. In that one moment, the dollar was severed from its physical anchor and became a fiat currency, money backed not by metal, but by the full faith and credit of the United States government. This was the birth of the modern dollar, a currency that could be printed in infinite amounts to manage economic cycles, but one that was also now subject to the total volatility of the global markets. The move was a unilateral declaration of economic independence that stunned America's allies. As Treasury Secretary Connally famously and arrogantly told a group of stunned foreign finance ministers, "The dollar is our currency, but it's your problem." The immediate aftermath was a surge in the stock market as investors cheered the boldness of the move. But the long-term consequences were far more complex and painful than Nixon ever admitted. The Nixon shock ushered in a decade of brutal stagflation, gas lines, and the eventual birth of the massive foreign exchange markets we know today. It allowed the government and the Federal Reserve to manipulate the money supply like never before, granting them a new kind of power that would define the late 20th and early 21st centuries. By decoupling the dollar from gold, Nixon essentially moved the world from a system of hard asset discipline to a system of total political discretion. The modern financial world, with its high-frequency trading, trillion-dollar deficits, And floating exchange rates was born in the ruins of that Sunday night announcement. Today, we live in the house that Nixon built, a world where money is no longer a thing you can hold, but a digital idea that moves at the speed of light across encrypted ledgers. The gold standard was a tether to reality that kept the system honest, but it was a tether that a growing American empire, burdened by global commitments and domestic debt, could no longer afford. When the link was snapped, the dollar became the ultimate instrument of global power, allowing the United States to export its inflation and finance its operations with a printing press that never stopped. But this newfound flexibility came with a heavy price for the average citizen. Without the gold anchor, the steady erosion of purchasing power accelerated, a trend that has seen the dollar lose over 80% of its value since that night in 1971. Every time you see the price of groceries or housing skyrocket, you are feeling the ripples of the 1971 explosion. The Nixon shock wasn't just a policy change, it was a fundamental rewiring of human society's relationship with the concept of value. It ended the era of sound money and began the era of total systemic debt. As we look back from the perspective of 2026, the decision at Camp David remains the single most important pivot point in modern economic history. It was the moment we traded the stability of the past for the unlimited and often dangerous flexibility of the future. We entered an era where the value of your labor is constantly being diluted by the creation of new currency, forcing everyone into a rat race of investing just to stay even. The story of the Nixon shock is the story of how the world's most powerful nation decided that it would no longer be bound by the physical limits of the earth, choosing instead to bet the entire global economy on the strength of a promise. It was a gamble that built the modern world of infinite credit and skyscraper-high debt. But it is a gamble we are still playing today, every time we swipe a card or check the balance of our digital wallets. This move also changed the nature of Wall Street itself. Without gold to act as a ceiling, the financial sector exploded in size, becoming the dominant force in the American economy. Banking was no longer about safe deposits. It became about complex derivatives, currency speculation, and leveraging the new fiat dollar into massive fortunes. If you want to understand the true nature of power in the 21st century, you have to understand the night the gold died and the modern dollar was born. It was the ultimate power play, a digital overthrow long before the first computer ever executed a trade. And it set the stage for every financial crisis and boom that has followed, from the 2008 crash to the inflation spikes of the 2020s. Nixon promised a new prosperity without war. But what he actually delivered was a new kind of warfare, financial one, fought with interest rates, currency devaluations, and the sheer force of the American printing press. This is the legacy of 1971, the year the dollar became a ghost, and the year the world learned that in the game of money and power, the rules are whatever the person with the biggest vault says they are. We're still living in the shadow of that August night, watching as the world searches for a new anchor. Whether it be gold again, or perhaps the digital gold of the future to replace the one Richard Nixon cut loose more than half a century ago. The Nixon shock proved that while you can print money, you cannot print trust. And as we move deeper into the 2020s, that lesson is becoming more relevant with every passing day. Understanding 1971 is the key to understanding why our current world feels so financially unstable, yet so full of artificial growth. It was the day the world chose the path of the infinite, for better or for worse.